Around the UK, hundreds of elite sports people are training for the London Olympics. Some, like the cyclist Chris Holley, are already household names. Others will join them after the Games.
I'm tall, come on!
London won the bid because of promises that were made about a long-term legacy of the Games, in particular that young people would be inspired by the Olympics to throw away their video games, take up sport and so improve the nation's health.
So what we know is that physical activity and exercise are good for people's health. So when we bid for the Olympic Games, it seems perfectly reasonable that we would start to think about whether the Games could have an impact at a population level on increasing physical activity and health. This matters, and this is why it's the prime promise that was made as a result of the Olympic Games to try and increase physical activity and sport.
I think when you watch such a big event as an Olympics on your doorstep, it's kind of like you get a snowball effect. It's like everybody thinks, oh, I can do that. And they're more aware of what's out there and on offer. And, it's kind of like when Sir Chris Hoy won in cycling, every little boy and girl was going and buying a bike. And, you get that snowball effect. And when there's success, it breeds interest.
Problem is, when we bid for the Games, a promise was made that the Games would inspire people, and particularly young people, to do more sport and physical activity without any real look or examination of the evidence as to whether that was possible.
In a study that we did in the University of Kent, we gathered data from the Athens 2004 Summer Olympic Games. Basically, what we did is to analyze the activity levels of the Greek population before the Games in 2003, 1 year after the Games, and then 5 years later. And what we observed, we've seen that there was a very big increase in people doing sport 1 year after the Games. However, 5 years later, the percentage of the active population doing sport regularly fall down at a lower levels than before the Games. So we can really talk about a rebound effect.
What we do know from studies over a number of previous Games in a number of years is that there is no evidence for an inherent effect on physical activity and sport of hosting the Olympic Games. What that means is, if you host the Olympic Games, people do not automatically go out and start participating in sport and physical activity. The Olympic Games can have an effect if policies and initiatives are put in place to encourage people to participate in sport. In fact, what an evidence review that we did for the Department of Health that was published in 2009 shows is that among people who are already psychologically engaged with the idea of sport, there is the potential to use an Olympic Games to encourage people who've participated in the past to participate again, and to encourage people who already do a small amount of sport to do a little bit more.
The sporting legacy depends on the fact that when you watch it on the television, you want to do it, which means that those sports have to have a very vigorous infrastructure to mop up the enthusiasm that is out there that is generated by the Games. If you want to do rowing, the ARA has to have a situation where they have helplines with people phoning up, plugging them in, allowing them to go rowing. If you want to do gymnastics, you have to be able to go and do it. And of course, that tends to be very short-lived. What we need is everybody to take more exercise. And that requires a great deal more work and a lot more money.
So we need to think about things like population level social marketing campaigns, about saying to people, well, the Olympic Games are here, you used to play sport in the past, why don't you come back and play again? Or you're already playing sport a little, you might be playing it once a week. We've got the Olympic Games here, isn't it about time you upped your game, you played 2 or 3 times a week, it's going to benefit your health in the long run.
What we want to avoid is the Wimbledon phenomena, is that when Wimbledon's on, you can't get a spot on any tennis court in the country. 2 weeks later, you can get on any tennis court in the country if you like, because nobody's out there. What we don't want is people to be physically active for the period of the Olympic Games and then stop.
What we've seen in terms of previous Games is people claiming that what leads to a physical activity and sport legacy is new facilities, because Olympic Games almost inevitably brings new facilities. The problem with producing new facilities and new playing fields is it's entirely focused on supply. And what the evidence suggests that we need to do if we're going to use an Olympic Games to increase sport and physical activity participation is we need to increase demand. We need to think about how we can get people to go and use those facilities.
It is really disappointing because the Greek government invested frenetically in order to create some very good facilities. that however today they are not really used for grassroots participation. It's really sad to see some of the venues that are really closed down completely because it's very expensive to maintain them if there is not a wise use of them.
The key to any country's long-term health is its children. Chris Dunn is the head teacher of a school in Tower Hamlets, which has been deeply involved in the school sports partnership. But what is, or rather what was, the school sports partnership?
If you think of every secondary school in the country, of which there were about 4,000, each one of those secondary schools became the hub of a small partnership with, say, 7 or 8 of their local primary schools. And each of those secondary schools were paid by the government to release one of their specialist PE teacher for half the week to work in those local primary schools, helping primary school teachers who by and large are not trained to be able to encourage or deliver sport.
What difference did that make? What did it involve and what difference did it make?
It made a huge difference. I mean, just to give you an example, in our partnership, in the year before our partnership started in Tower Hamlets, there was one inter-primary school competition. That's where children from all the primary schools, or some of them, could come together and play sport. The last time we counted it, Chris, I think it was something like about 38.
What has changed under this government?
They initially abandoned it completely. We led a campaign to stop that happening. Huge numbers of our youngsters who've been involved in this work themselves went to Parliament. It was one of the coldest days of the decade. They stood outside Parliament for 5 hours lobbying MPs. They went in to see ministers in the Education Ministry. They delivered a petition to the Prime Minister in Downing Street. As a result of that, we got back about 20% of the original funding nationally. But the networks effectively were dismantled. So it had a devastating impact across the country.
If you take a look at it, what's happened is that we are eroding the opportunities for children to be involved in physical activity, whilst at the same time promoting the importance of physical activity. Now, those two things don't join for me.
You might think the Olympics are all about competitive sports, and that's certainly what the current government says in terms of its school games policy and the development of a new school games. But if we go back to the origin of the Olympics and we think about Pierre de Coubertin, the originator of the modern games, he said it's not the winning but the taking part. It's not winning but it's playing well. So, would we be happy if we finished 10th, 20th, 30th in the medal table, but if we got a 5% increase in physical activity levels across the population as a whole? That would be a far more important legacy, from my point of view, of the Olympic Games than winning 100, 200 gold medals.
Although no other country has attempted to improve the health of its people through hosting the Olympic Games, a few have managed to improve the health of their citizens through government-led sports initiatives.
Especially Scandinavian countries, they've been really successful of having a very big part of the population being physically active in sport without necessarily hosting a big event or even being successful in the Olympic Games.
Many people look at Finland, who's produced fantastic improvement in their overall health of their community by a phenomenal number of initiatives which are designed to deliver exercise to the community. You need to listen to what kids want to do. And in Finland, they have these huge sports halls that are used not just for the schools, but for the community, and you can book them. You book them by the half hour at weekends in the evenings to use them. And what the kids want to do now is cheerleading. Boys and girls with the ghetto blaster and a dance leader from the different schools, from different groups, from clubs, sitting there, taking huge amounts of exercise, thoroughly enjoying themselves. It's not an Olympic sport. Cheerleading is considered to be maybe a bit peripheral, but it's what the kids in Finland want to do. And of course, that's fantastically good for you. Half an hour of sort of Pilates exercises, cheerleading with music. If kids are queuing up to do that, then that's what you provide.
But if a country with no Olympic Games like Finland can improve health like this, how much more could we do with the inspiration of having the London Games?
I think that with the 2012 Olympics, you are definitely going to get a lot of people wanting to go out and do various sports. Whether that's going to be sustained because of having the right amount of clubs or people out to coach and to help and advise, that's another thing altogether. You know, whether we keep that momentum going is the big question, and I think that would be the failure of the Games if we don't do that.
It certainly would be wonderful if we could believe that our Olympic sporting heroes can inspire us to be fitter, more active and healthier individuals. Are you concerned, Chris, that the London 2012 Olympics will turn out to be just like the Wimbledon effect? The Wimbledon effect is famously short-lived. The summer comes, the summer goes, and people stop taking to tennis courts. Is that your concern?
That is a concern. You know, I think that nothing was as good as the partnerships could have been, and certainly across a wider area and a uniform area that gave that minimum level of opportunity to every kid.
I'm a citizen of this country as well. I understand that we have got to make cuts. The point I would make, though, is that you don't cut programmes that you know ultimately are going to be so hugely beneficial to the country as a whole and society as a whole that it's going to cost you a huge amount more money down the line if you get it wrong. £162 million to involve every single child in every single school in the country in active sport must pay huge dividends, you know, later down the line in terms of health benefits. I mean, it'll be a pinprick compared with what you're going to have to spend through the National Health Service and social care and health care. You know, as the head teacher of a school literally a mile and a half from the Olympic Stadium, I'm intensely angry that these cuts are going to impact very seriously on some of the poorest children in the country.
What do you think now about the likelihood of Sebco's pledge?
I still haven't given up on the idea that we might persuade the government, you know, to put more money back into school sport. But if we can't persuade them to do that, then I think, you know, there will be no legacy of that kind. London Games will be like every other Olympic Games. It'll be a great party and everybody will thoroughly enjoy it, and then it will be history.